Clare. Clearly this is a major issue which is convulsing Europe, and frankly I'm shocked that there's only 2 of us in here who've raised this today. It's the 3rd time we've got this issue as a topical issue, and it's absolutely reprehensible, the dire situation that hundreds of thousands, indeed millions of people around the globe are being placed in. Now, when Mare Nostrum was cancelled, we know that the Irish government sat at meetings of the EU and staged dumb, and were ordered that if you have to say anything, talk about the handful that we've already agreed to take. Now, Europe undoubtedly now has a migrant crisis, but it is precisely because migrants have a European crisis, a crisis caused by the intervention and the regime change attempts into their regions, orchestrated and led by the US military. And Ireland, as Deputy Wallace says, is culpable and has a role in that. Now, we discussed this morning with the Minister for Transport the list of permissions given to US aircraft and indeed in destinations to Saudi Arabia with munitions on board which could be cluster bombs, which in fairness Ireland spearheaded a campaign against such activity years ago, but we could be allowing such weaponry transit through Shannon. We need to do more. Whether it's 400, 600, 4,000, 6,000 refugees that are welcomed here, I welcome them. I don't believe it has any connection to our homeless situation here. It will not stop any homeless person getting a house. The only way in which homeless people will be housed is if we build more social housing. And I would like you, Minister, as spokesperson on our behalf, to welcome greater numbers than we've indicated, not least because of our culpability. I have no problem myself in taking people into my home, as thousands of other Irish people have as well. It's just not good enough. We're culpable and we need to do a lot more.
Thanks. Deputy, the Minister has 4 minutes to respond.
Thank you. According to the UNHCR, more than 50 million people are fleeing war and conflicts worldwide, and many more are looking for a better future, as we well know. Obviously, we can't accommodate everyone in Europe without endangering our own societal cohesion, but clearly there's an enormous humanitarian response in Europe right now that needs a comprehensive response. There are many different elements to this response, I believe. Ireland has always, over the years, lived up to its international humanitarian obligations, in my opinion, and we are fully committed to playing our part in addressing the migration crisis facing Europe. And we have all, as you say, we have all been shocked and upset at what we've seen in southern and central Europe and the distressing scenes during the rescues in the Mediterranean, and we do need to do all that we can. We have been working proactively right over the months. Myself, in the JHA meetings, Minister Flanagan and the Taoiseach, we've all been involved in developing the European Action Programme on Migration, as it's called, to deal with these issues over many months, often behind the scenes, obviously, but also in the Council meetings, working through how the European Union can proactively be involved in this issue and deal with the crisis on their doorstep. And as I say, there's many elements to it. So that we get that comprehensive response. And there are so many different elements to it. There is working with the African countries where development is needed. There's providing more humanitarian aid, which the heads of state will be discussing this evening. There's working with people who are already in the refugee camps and trying to ensure that the standards in those camps are good enough for people to remain there until they're processed and helped to come through the various processes in an orderly way. And we need more legal routes to Europe. Of that there is no doubt. But we do need to have some further controls over the current situation that we're seeing, and that was part of the discussion yesterday. The situation actually did change rapidly over the summer months, and that's why very early on Minister Coveney got a government decision, approached the government proactively to sell the Ellie Ethna, subsequently the Ellie Neve, down and the Ellie Samuel Beckett to the Mediterranean to carry out the rescue missions, which they have done very successfully. Not many countries are doing that. We're one of the countries doing it. Clearly, we've given 41 million in aid to Syria as well. And it is a very complex issue there, both in Syria and Libya. And we do need the international community, and of course Ireland as well, playing its part to resolve the conflict in Syria. And more efforts need to be made at every level, including UN and internationally, between Russia and the States, China, and everybody who has a voice should be using that voice. I can only agree with you on that, because we do need to get a resolution there, because so many of the refugees are coming from war-torn Syria, and they are coming from Eritrea. 2 weeks ago, as you will be aware, we as a government decided that we would accept up to 4,000 people overall in the resettlement and relocation programme. 520 people from the camps in Lebanon. We've already had staff out working, identifying the people who are in a position to come to Ireland, and they've started arriving. And we agreed to the extra numbers as well. We've opted into the EU emergency relocation measure, which we had a choice as to whether we did that or not. We did proactively go ahead and make that decision. Of course, it will be discussed in the Dáil in the Senate. There will be a motion here next week to have a detailed discussion in relation to that. I also informed the Justice and Home Affairs Council meeting yesterday that we would not be taking up the option which we have to wait 3 months, as we do when we opt into decisions. We could have delayed the whole process. Of course, we didn't want to do that, so we agreed that we would opt in immediately. Denmark wasn't in a position to opt in because of its own constitutional position, and neither did the UK, but we said that we would indeed come in. So clearly the government has now set up the Irish Refugee Protection Programme. We've had a meeting, I chaired a meeting with about 25 different groups who have a contribution to make in working towards solutions here, providing accommodation, taking up those voluntary offers of about 16,000. Not all of them will be feasible to take up in the first instance, because people do need to have the assessment as to their refugee status done first in the orientation centres, and we have agreed that that will be done as a priority basis in the next couple of weeks. Once the people arrive from Italy and Greece, they will be assessed immediately as to their refugee status, but it is expected that up to between 80 and 90% of them will immediately get refugee status. This is a new type of programme. We haven't had a programme like this before, where the residents who will come here are identified in Italy and Greece in the first instance in these centres that have been set up there this week, and they will be identified, the suitable people, to come to Ireland, and they will then be given the opportunity to have that assessment done here and to be accommodated here.
Thanks,
there will be short-term accommodation issues, but also medium and long-term.
The rest will be read into the record. Deputy Wallace, do you have a supplemental?
Minister, you're talking about us putting money into aid, and that's all very well and good, but many of the refugees that are coming to Europe at the moment are trying to get to countries that have played a part in bombing their homes and killing their relatives.
Yeah.
And be it through the use of airports, through the sales of arms. Well, where's the logic of that? Why do we continue to allow Shannon to be used to destroy their countries? 1.3 million citizens have been killed in this region, citizens, not military people, in the last 13 years. 1.3 million people by the US military machine, and we still allow them to use Shannon? Minister, there are more weapons in the Middle East than bread. Why don't we tell the Americans that we'll let bread through Shannon, not arms? It's outrageous, Minister, that we can turn a blind eye to how Shannon has been used. It's a disgrace, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Daly.
The reality is that what's ending up on European shores, making an horrendous journey to reach here, is simply the tip of the iceberg. Millions of the refugees are confined onto the borders of Lebanon and Turkey and in the Middle Eastern Europe region themselves. Half of the world's refugees come from Syria, Afghanistan and Somalia. And last year we allowed 6 flights go from the United States to Afghanistan, carrying hundreds of tons of ammunition. And I've no doubt, because of the experience of what happened in Iraq and weapons being ended up in the hands of the opposition, that some of that weaponry that transited through our shores ended up in the hands of the Taliban and ISIS, the very people who are playing a role in driving these people out of their homes in the first place. And I think one of the key points that we want to register here, I welcome way more than 4,000 refugees here, but we really need a debate in Europe about the reasons why these people are being made refugees in the first place, and our culpability in that rests at Shannon Airport, and we really have to seriously look at what's been transited through there in our name, the name of a neutral country.